Hey, Carson Bible Church. It is time for prayer meeting. So last week we were working in Psalm chapter 19, and I think we'll actually spend a couple of more weeks in the rest of Psalm 19. I think there's a lot of material there for us to work through, and I think it can be really beneficial to your prayer life. Even C.S. Lewis called Psalm 19 the greatest poem in all the Psalms, and I find some encouragement there that there's a lot to be found here in this psalm. So last week we worked through the middle section of Psalm 19, which was verses 7 through 11. Today we're going to work through the first section, which is verses 1 through 6. So I'm going to read those verses for you. Psalm 19, starting in verse 1, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom, leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat." Well, this is a psalm of David, and this whole first section of the psalm is all about seeing God's glory revealed in creation, and really specifically up in the skies, and even more specifically in the sun, and the light and the heat and the power of the sun, and the dependability of the sun to rise and set regularly day after day. And I think it's really interesting for us to think about young David, right? We know he was a shepherd, and so young David probably wrote this while he's out in the fields watching the sheep graze, and he's experiencing the light and the heat and the power and intensity of the sun. And it is intense when you think about that area of the world where David would have been, and the sheep need to graze in an open area, and so it would have been a really intense and powerful heat that David was experiencing, and that really causes him to reflect on God's glory. And as we saw last week, experiencing God in creation led David then to reflect and meditate upon how he experiences God in his word, right? God reveals himself to us in creation, and God also reveals himself to us in the word. And I think it's important for us to really take a cue from David here, actually. We in Southern California are now at the end of July, which means we're moving into August and September, which are usually our hottest months of the year. And we as a church are having to meet outdoors right now. So on Sunday mornings, we have to put up shades and shield ourselves from the power of the sun and the brightness and sunburn are definite concerns for us right now. The heat itself, the temperature, hasn't yet been a concern for us, but it probably will be in the coming weeks. And I think it's so interesting. We do all kinds of things to shield ourselves from the forces of nature, right? We have to. We build shelters, we put up shades, we have air conditioners, really to keep ourselves comfortable. We do everything we can to keep ourselves comfortable. And our first inclination when we are exposed to the power of the elements, and especially the power of the sun, its brightness and its heat and its intensity, our first inclination is to complain about it. We do everything we can to shield ourselves from it, and when we can't shield ourselves from it, we complain about it. And if we were to go to God in prayer, probably our first inclination would be maybe lament. And yet what we see here is David's first inclination is praise. To worship God to see the way that God has revealed himself to us and his power as we experience the power of the Son. The Son is so far away from us, and yet so powerful and so intense, in good ways and also in dangerous ways too, right? We depend on the heat of the sun, and we depend on the light of the sun. The sun and the earth circling around it is what gives us our seasons and our days, and those are all good things. And yet a full exposure to the sun can also be very dangerous, as it can cause us sunburn, heat stroke, and it can be quite damaging to us and dangerous. And while we might be inclined to complain, David here is inclined to worship, and it drives him to God's word. And so I would encourage you in your prayer time this evening to think about that as we are looking to Sunday in just a couple of more days, and as we are preparing our hearts to worship on Sunday. How might we, as we are having our worship services outdoors, rather than just look for ways to avoid experiencing the sun, and rather than be inclined to complain about the heat and the intensity and the elements that God has really put in place for our good, rather, how might we allow those things to draw our hearts into worship God, as David did? So I would encourage you to meditate upon that this evening, and prepare your hearts to worship on Sunday morning, that as we experience God in his creation, it might drive us to worship him, and it might drive us to meditate upon his word as it did with David. God bless you. We'll see you soon.